Early morning sunlight sliced across the empty training field like a silent blade, casting long shadows over the dew-damp grass and swirling mist that still clung to the ground. Like ghosts unwilling to leave, a faint breeze whispered through the stillness, barely brushing the worn targets standing like sentinels in the distance. A lone figure crouched in the soft light, small, focused, silent. Eliza Quinn, 22 years old, barely 5'3", her frame slight, almost fragile. Beneath her oversized fatigues, her hair, the color of autumn wheat, was pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense braid, and cradled in her arms was a sniper rifle nearly as long as she was tall, an aging Remington N24. Its matte black finish dulled from years of use and care. She breathed out slowly, letting the moment stretch. Her finger gently kissed the trigger. A heartbeat passed, then the shot. A single bullet sliced clean through the air, riding the wind like it had a purpose of its own. Over a kilometer away, a steel plate rang out, a crisp, metallic note echoing across the field. Dead center. Silence fell across the range. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Even birds seemed to pause mid-flight. The commanding officer, stunned, walked over to the petite woman still calmly lowering her rifle. "Who trained you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a tarnished, time-worn silver ID card. She handed it over without ceremony, her eyes never leaving the officer's. "My grandfather, SEAL Team 6, type the ghost returns if you believe honor can live through a single shot." But that morning wasn't the beginning. Eliza had arrived at Fort Logan 3 weeks earlier, a civilian assigned under the Civilian Reserve Program for Logistics Support. Petite, quiet, seemingly out of place, she kept her head down, her words few, her movements deliberate. During breaks, while others laughed, flirted, or scrolled their phones, Eliza sat alone, cleaning that old M24 with the reverence of someone handling an heirloom. She never bragged, never corrected the whispers. They didn't know she had grown up in the wilds of Montana with her grandfather Samuel "Ghost" Quinn, one of the most legendary snipers in SEAL Team 6 history. To the outside world, he was just a reclusive, old man with cold eyes and a steel jaw. To her, he was a mentor, a protector, and a man who taught her to think like a hunter. Every morning before dawn, he'd take her into the dense forests and teach her how to read wind patterns, how to feel the land, how to hear silence. He taught her to calculate bullet drop instinctively, to identify terrain advantages without needing maps, and most importantly to breathe slow and act slower when pressure mounted. He never spoke about war. He didn't have to. It was etched into his hands, his scars, his eyes. One day, Eliza asked to observe from the spotting tower during a scheduled rifle training. The reaction was laughter, bitter and sharp. "Little girl, rifles aren't makeup accessories," a sergeant barked, loud enough to turn heads. "Probably just here to count ammunition," another snorted. Eliza said nothing. She simply pulled out a clean cloth and polished the old Remington's barrel with patient, practiced movements. That rifle had seen combat in deserts and jungles most people couldn't even pronounce. It had ended lives and saved them, and it had passed from warrior to warrior until it landed in her hands. During her free time, she sat alone, scribbling left-handed notes into a battered leather-bound journal. It had once belonged to her grandfather, pages filled with sketches of terrain, wind calculations, distance conversions, the kinds of entries born not from textbooks, but from experience. To the others, she was a curiosity, too quiet, too intense, too serious about things she supposedly had no reason to touch. They whispered behind her back, said she was pretending, said she'd wash out by the end of the first week, said she didn't belong. But Eliza carried herself with the quiet precision of someone who'd trained under pressure. No classroom could replicate. Her stance was flawless, grip second nature, sight alignment reflexive. While others fumbled through safety briefings, she moved like a shadow. They saw a small girl with no business around weapons. What they missed was the way her eyes scanned movement patterns, how she positioned herself with clear lines of sight and quick exits, how her posture always accounted for threat angles. These weren't conscious habits, they were ingrained instincts, but bias, especially the kind wrapped in tradition and fear, is a powerful thing. Skill alone wouldn't be enough. During a field exercise, Eliza quietly suggested adjusting the firing line by 3 meters to counteract a shift in the crosswind. A simple, well-calculated observation based on barometric pressure, elevation, and wind speed. Staff Sergeant Murphy barely looked up. "You're here for logistics, not tactical planning. Stick to what you know." The words hit like a slap, but Eliza had been taught never to challenge authority in public. So she bit her tongue. Her reward was being reassigned to weapons cleaning. A quiet demotion masked as logistics. She was kept out of the way while others played soldier. While cleaning rifles in the armory that night, a squad leader passed behind her, loud enough for everyone to hear. Should have learned to cook instead of playing G. Jane. The next morning, Eliza applied for voluntary marksmanship training open to all personnel. Her application was rejected before noon. Standard infantry certification not complete. The notice read that she knew male logistics staff who'd been accepted. Without question, then the accident happened. A recruit, nervous and jittery, fired outside his lane. The bullet ricocheted hard off the wrong barrier and nearly struck a group of observers. Chaos broke out. Officers scrambled, shouting. Sirens. Eliza, in the equipment tent nearby, had heard the wrongness of the shot, the sound, the angle, the physics. She traced the origin, recalculated wind and barrel elevation, and spotted the error instantly. The firing position was off by 3 degrees. A lethal oversight no one else had caught. She ran to the range officer and calmly explained the flaw, explained how the setup had created a dangerous ricochet zone. She wasn't thanked. She was reprimanded for being in a restricted area. The report later blamed her for contributing to the safety violation. Civilian overreach, they called it. She was pulled from all range activity and reassigned kitchen duty. The age-old military punishment for women who stepped out of line. That night, alone in her bunk, she opened the small wooden box at the foot of her bed. Inside were 3 items: a worn black and white photo of a SEAL in full dress uniform, a military ID card dulled with age, and a bronze medal so weathered it had turned green. And one final piece, a note, in sharp, tight handwriting, "To my best student, the ghost." She could still hear his voice. "The shot that matters most isn't the one that hits the target, Lizzie. It's the one that proves you belong there at all." They'd meant to shame her, diminish her, remove her. Instead, they gave her time, a week to study the field, to memorize every line of sight, every high point, every angle, every shadow. They handed her a hunting ground dot, and Eliza Quinn had always been a hunter. Saturday morning arrived with low mist curling across the training field like ghost smoke, rising from forgotten battles. Advanced marksmanship candidates, some of the best in the unit, assembled. For their quarterly long-range exam, targets were set at 400 meters, 700 meters, and the final one, a steel plate at 1,100 meters, over half a mile away. A test only the elite passed. Lieutenant Daniels stood before the group, clipboard in hand. "One of the candidates is out sick," he said. "We've got an open slot. Anyone qualified?" Silence. Even among the top tier, that final shot was feared. It demanded absolute perfection. From the edge of the observation deck, quiet, steady, Eliza's voice rang out like a crack of cold thunder. "I trained in the Montana Highlands. I can fill the position." Heads whipped around. Several trainees exchanged looks, smirking, whispering. This was going to be a disaster. Daniels looked at her and saw something in her stance. Stillness. Control. And a quiet fire that told him this wasn't going to be a disaster. This was going to be a reckoning. She stood at the line, with her shoulders squared and spine straight, the morning light washing over her like a quiet blessing. Though she was the only woman on that field, Eliza Quinn held herself like someone born for the ground beneath her boots. She didn't fidget. She didn't posture. She simply existed with the stillness of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Lieutenant Daniels approached, clipboard in hand, eyes guarded. "This isn't basic qualification," he said, his tone edging toward a warning. "This is advanced precision shooting. Miss one target, you're out." Eliza only nodded. No hesitation. No second guessing. Then, without a word, she walked to the weapons rack and retrieved her grandfather's rifle, the old Remington N24. Its black finish worn down in spots from years of use. Compared to the sleek, tech-laden weapons the other candidates carried, it looked like a relic from another era. But in her hands, it became something else entirely, an extension of her breath, her blood, her bones. Every movement was seamless. She slid into position with the ease of ritual, the rifle already knowing her grip, while others tapped digital wind meters and scrolled through range cards. Eliza simply closed her eyes, lifted her face to the breeze, and listened. She watched how the grass swayed. She read the silence. She measured the invisible. The first target, 400 meters. A standard bull's eye. Eliza's form was textbook perfect, but it wasn't just technique that set her apart. It was the intention behind it. The rifle settled into her shoulder like it belonged there, her cheek brushing the stock with the quiet familiarity of 1,000 previous shots. She inhaled, exhaled, and fired. Dead center, the range observer called, the disbelief in his voice barely contained. 700 meters. The wind had picked up, dancing unpredictably across the field. Gusts came and went like waves lapping at a quiet shore. Eliza didn't react. She waited, breathing, watching, waiting for the rhythm to reveal itself. And when it did, when the wind paused, ever so briefly, she sent the second round downrange. The metallic ping of impact echoed across the field. Center ring. By then, the entire observation area had gone silent. Even the instructors, hardened by years of training and repetition, leaned in. They recognized it now. This wasn't luck. This was a different kind of mastery, the kind you didn't get from simulators or weekend courses. Then came the final test. 1,100 meters. The steel plate was barely visible to the naked eye. Nothing more than a shimmer on the edge of reality. At that distance, everything mattered. Wind, humidity, barometric pressure, the Earth's rotation. One wrong calculation, even by a hair, and the bullet would drift feet off course. Eliza adjusted her scope, but she didn't use devices. She didn't need to. The information was already inside her, burned into muscle memory, into instinct, into the teachings whispered across pine forests and snow-slicked ridges by a man who'd once been called the Ghost. She exhaled slowly, found the pause between heartbeats, her most sacred moment, and pulled the trigger with the gentle pressure of someone cracking an eggshell. Metal rang against metal. The field froze. Silence. Then movement. Lieutenant Daniels approached, his expression slowly transforming from skepticism to something close to reverence. Who trained you? Eliza reached into her pocket. No grand words, no speech, just a worn, silver ID card passed quietly into his hand. He looked down. Samuel Ghost Quinn, Navy SEAL Team 6. From behind him, a full colonel stepped forward. His face had gone pale with memory. He studied the card for a long beat. The Ghost saved my life. In Ramadi, he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. Pulled me out of a kill zone when no one else could make the shot. He turned to Eliza, something tender and fierce in his gaze. Today, I see him in your eyes. By nightfall, the story had wrapped around Fort Logan like lightning coiled in wire. The quiet girl in logistics had hit 3 impossible shots with a rifle older than most of the soldiers there, and she was the granddaughter of the Ghost. The next morning, Staff Sergeant Murphy approached her in the armory. Gone was the arrogance, the condescension. In its place was humility. That adjustment you mentioned, about the firing line, he asked, scratching the back of his neck. Could you show me what you meant? One by one, the others followed. Not for praise, not for photo ops, but for knowledge. They came to learn how she read wind with her skin, how she calculated range with a glance, how she kept her breath, calm when adrenaline surged. The soldier who mocked her told her to learn to cook instead found himself seated quietly beside her, watching as she disassembled and cleaned her rifle with a care that felt sacred. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't need to. Lieutenant Daniels came by her quarters that evening with something wrapped in cloth, a rare first-edition sniper training manual written by her grandfather for SEAL teams, now long declassified. Figured you might want to see what he left behind, he said. The shooting range updated its safety guidelines that same week. They were based on the quiet notes Eliza had submitted long before the near accident. At the bottom of the bulletin, in fine print, it read, "Contributing research by E. Quinn." And just like that, the ghost's legacy found its echo in the present. During the unit's weekly briefing, Eliza was invited to speak. She stood before over 100 soldiers, many of whom had doubted her mere days before, and addressed them not with grandeur, but with that same quiet strength they'd come to respect. Honor doesn't come from badges or ribbons, she said. It comes from people willing to stay quiet when they're laughed at, who let their actions speak louder than their ego. The applause that followed wasn't for show. It was a standing ovation of recognition from warriors who had finally seen past their own biases. After the briefing, a young female recruit approached her, shoulders tense with fear. "Ma'am, I've been afraid to try marksmanship. They say women aren't built for it." Eliza handed her the cleaning kit for her grandfather's rifle. "Tomorrow morning, 0500, range 7. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Sometimes the greatest revolutions don't happen in parades or protests. Sometimes they happen in silence. One shot at a time. One student meeting the right teacher at the exact right moment." Eliza didn't walk around declaring her heritage. She didn't need to. Every breath she took, every movement she made, told the story of a man who once trained a little girl in the cold of the mountains to see the world as lines and angles, to see herself as something deadly and necessary. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. She was there to protect something sacred. And those who once laughed at her now knew better. They'd learned that those who seem weakest often carry the heaviest legacies. That power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it watches from the shadows, speaks through breath and aim and stillness. In a world that craves attention and loud declarations, Eliza Quinn offered something rarer, inherited wisdom, quiet precision, and the kind of discipline that doesn't seek acknowledgement. Her grandfather had once told her, "The most dangerous opponent is the one no one sees coming." And he was right, because the girl no one noticed had become the legacy everyone would remember. Not with headlines, but through the people she changed. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in stone. It's what you pass forward in silence into hands that will carry it further. Type never underestimate her if you believe silence holds power. Subscribe to HC Stories for more hidden legacy stories. Share if you've ever been underestimated and proved them wrong without saying a word.